On this Tuesday night, the U.S. president responds to Russia's moves.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
The sanctions imposed on Russia, how Canada is responding, and the reaction from Ukrainians. Denied bail, the legal next steps for some of the organizers of the so-called Freedom Convoy.
Back up, please.
Plus, what Ottawa endured and is trying to overcome.
It was really brutal.
Under the weather with COVID, the Queen scales back some duties. And 2 + 2 = Happy Tuesday, the one-of-a-kind occasion on the calendar.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Canada has joined NATO allies in announcing sanctions against Russia, denouncing Vladimir Putin's decision to violate international law.
Make no mistake, this is a further invasion of a sovereign state, and it is completely unacceptable.
President Joe Biden today also accused Russia of starting an invasion. He said it was clear from Vladimir Putin's speech yesterday that Putin intends to move even further into Ukraine, carving out a chunk of the country.
None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification. Further Russian assault in Ukraine remains a severe threat in the days ahead. And if Russia proceeds, it is Russia and Russia alone that bears the responsibility.
Russian troops have already moved into Donetsk and Luhansk in southeast Ukraine, where Russia has backed a bloody armed rebellion for 8 years. Putin calls it a peacekeeping mission. Biden doesn't buy that.
Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war.
About 150,000 Russian troops remain poised along Ukraine's borders. Putin's next moves aren't clear, nor is whether the sanctions, including suspending a gas pipeline from Russia to Europe, will make any difference. Jackson Proskow begins our coverage tonight.
Smoke billowed from a Ukrainian power plant outside the rebel-controlled areas of Luhansk. Its territory still controlled by Ukraine. On land, Russia now recognizes as independent and is prepared to take by force. In Moscow, Russia's parliament authorized military action on foreign soil. We have been left no choice, said the deputy defense minister. President Vladimir Putin reasserted demands that Ukraine abandon hope of joining NATO, demilitarize, and cede disputed territory, conditions that are impossible to meet.
This is a serious escalation by Russia and a flagrant violation of international law.
Russia's attempt to redraw the map has brought swift international response.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
In Washington, President Joe Biden announced a first round of sanctions on Russian banks, on Russia's ability to borrow money, and on Vladimir Putin's closest allies.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors?
The EU sanctioned nearly every single member of Russia's parliament. Germany suspended the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline, cutting off a key source of income and European dependence for Moscow.
If he invades, for the rest of his presidency, Russia will flounder economically. I will say that flat out.
On the streets of Kyiv, Ukrainians remain equally defiant.
And if they will try to come here, they will be in hell.
Putin's calculus seems vastly different. He questions Ukraine's very existence as a sovereign nation and has since ordered the evacuation of all Russian diplomats from Ukraine. Another ominous sign for a country already on the brink.
Tonight, it feels like any attempt at a diplomatic solution is now over. A planned meeting between the U.S. Secretary of State and Russia's foreign minister has been canceled, and we've learned the U.S. is redeploying more of its troops within Europe to shore up the Baltic states, another move meant to deter future Russian aggression. Donna?
All right, Jackson, thanks. The sanctions imposed today are intended to convince Putin to change course and avoid what the U.S. president calls the worst-case scenario. Our Crystal Goomansingh just crossed the Ukrainian border into Poland tonight. Crystal, what are you hearing from people in the region?
Donna, Ukrainian leaders have been waiting for tough sanctions to be applied to Russia. The hope was that they would have come sooner. However, if they are tough enough and enough countries act together, they could limit how far Russia advances into Ukraine. As for the mood of the people, they almost seem more united now. Not only in Lviv, where we've just come from, but Kyiv as well. They are determined to keep up with their regular life, pushing away any notion of panic or fear. If something will start, well, I'm too old to fight, but at least I'm still capable to carry ammo. But for people with somewhere else to go, it's hard to quiet voices outside of the country. An international medical student tells us his family is urging him to return to India.
My parents are very much panicked. They always call, come, and all.
So your parents back home don't want you to be in Ukraine right now?
Yeah.
What did they say to you?
They only see the news channels and all, and they panic very much.
And how do you feel?
Not so much panic, but due to my parent issues, I have to go India.
Foreigners are often reminded that Ukrainians have been engaged in an ongoing war in the east for the past 8 years. They say that Ukraine is a very large country, and until the conflict is at their doorstep, they refuse to be paralyzed by fear. Donna?
Crystal Goomansingh, thanks. Well, Canada's position mirrors that of the U.S., that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has started. It is, the Deputy Prime Minister said today, a test of our resolve and that of our allies. Mercedes Stephenson has Canada's reaction to all of this. Mercedes.
Donna, the tone here in the nation's capital, urgent and dire, from the Prime Minister and the top ministers from his cabinet who were gathered around him tonight during a press conference. Take a listen to what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland had to say about the situation in Ukraine.
Canada and our allies will defend democracy. We are taking these actions today to stand against authoritarianism. The people of Ukraine, like all people, must be free to determine their own future.
This is an attempt to replace that rules-based international order with a world in which might makes right, where the great powers have the authority to redraw the borders, dictate the foreign policies, and control the governments of sovereign democracies.
Donna, you could really feel the weight there of the potential for a global crisis here that the government was underlining. Canada taking action falling in line with what the United States has done in terms of announcing sanctions against Russia. Those sanctions include banning Canadians from dealing financially with the independent states, sanctioning the Russian parliamentarians who voted in favor of recognizing those states, banning Canadians from purchasing Russian sovereign debt, as well as putting sanctions on 2 state-backed Russian banks. And officials say that this will escalate further if necessary. This is just the first round, not considered the invasion round. If Russia goes further, the sanctions will get worse and could include Canadian exports.
Mercedes, Canada is moving additional troops to the region. What can you tell us about that?
So 460 additional troops scheduled to go in. That includes a frigate, a plane that can detect submarines and do intelligence on land, as well as a battery of artillery troops. That's 120 people, but it will take a month to mobilize that last one. So certainly some concerns about both the numbers being sent and how quickly Canada is capable of actually moving. Donna?
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. Now to the aftermath of the weeks of protest and disruption in the nation's capital. The trucks are out of the downtown core, and some of the organizers have been denied bail, at least for now. David Akin reports.
Even as she was being arrested, Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Lich called on her supporters to hold the line.
We'll see you soon, Tamara. Hold the line.
That and other calls to action Lich made during her 3 weeks at the center of the occupation of Ottawa were at the heart of a judge's decision Tuesday to keep Lich behind bars and deny her bail request until her trial begins on the single charge of counseling to commit the offense of mischief. It is a charge which carries the potential of 10 years or more in prison. There is no doubt here, the judge told Lich. On conviction, you are certainly facing a potentially lengthy term of imprisonment. Convoy co-organizer Pat King faces similar charges. He's been in jail since he was arrested Friday.
Please step out of the vehicle, sir.
Prosecutors want to deny bail to King as well. A judge will decide on that on Friday. The proceedings in court occurred as Ottawa continued in recovery mode. A downtown core still under police restrictions, but largely free of any protesters. And while MPs are back in their ridings, senators started debating the Federal Emergencies Act, with a focus on the fact that authorities have frozen more than 200 personal and commercial bank accounts containing a combined $7 million.
They still need the tools, the economic measures that are designed to limit financial support for these illegal blockades. They continue to play an important role.
And even though officials said the process has started to unfreeze some accounts, opponents say the government has failed to provide the evidence needed to justify such extraordinary powers.
You know, Senator Gold, you'll excuse some of us if we just simply don't believe the rhetoric that we are being given by the government.
If a majority in the Senate do not support the government's invocation of the Emergencies Act, any extraordinary powers being used by law enforcement will immediately cease. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
Researchers with the Anti-Defamation League in the United States say several hundred people who donated to the so-called Freedom Convoy in Canada also donated to the January 6th demonstration at the U.S. Capitol in Washington. The ADL analyzed information leaked by hackers who accessed the crowdfunding platform Give, Send, Go. It found 1,100 people donated to both the protests in Canada and the January 6th attempted insurrection. The biggest funder of both campaigns was the editor-in-chief of a far-right news website who contributed more than $300,000. The ADL says donating does not necessarily mean support for violence or extremism. Well, nearly 2 years after one of the worst mass shootings in Canadian history, an inquiry into the rampage began hearings in Nova Scotia today. It was in April of 2020 that a lone gunman disguised as a Mountie killed 22 people over a 13-hour period near the small community of Portapique. The terror of that day is long since over, but the pain and the loss for the victims' families is still raw. Ross Lord reports.
The commissioners conducting the public inquiry say they're doing a thorough investigation of the horrendous Nova Scotia massacre.
Public inquiries like this commission are powerful and flexible processes.
Their job is to discover exactly what happened, why it happened, and how the gunman was able to continue killing for 13 hours before police killed him. A rampage of horror that's left hundreds of people in a string of communities traumatized.
I didn't lose my life that day. You know, there's 22 people did, but I lost the life that I had.
Daryl Curry was almost killed at the Onslow Fire Hall by RCMP officers. They fired a series of shots after they mistook someone for the gunman.
We want answers to how it got that far and why, what happened in Portapique, what happened in Glenholm, what happened in Plains Road, all of those other locations.
Most victims' families are still too shaken to speak publicly. Through their lawyer, they claim there's secrecy surrounding who will be called to testify and whether their lawyers will be able to question witnesses directly. Questions about the inquiry extend beyond victims' families and others who were traumatized. Among those also expressing concerns is Nova Scotia's Premier.
Concerns around, the completeness of the witness list, the ability to cross-examine, and just make sure that the questions that need to be asked are being asked.
Including the RCMP's response, their failure to contain the gunman, and their inability to issue an emergency alert for the public. Policing analysts say it's crucial for all Canadians that the inquiry identifies deficiencies and produces improvements.
The RCMP have to have in place a first responder strategy to deal with an active shooter so that this type of situation never occurs in Canada, at least with the deadly results that it did.
The commissioners insist the inquiry will be transparent while considering the needs of emotionally devastated participants, including those called to testify beginning next week.
I don't have a lot of faith in the inquiry.
Curry hopes, in some way, the outcome at least helps him live with the aftermath. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
A correction now on a story we broadcast January 7th. In our COVID-19 coverage, we reported the majority of hospitalizations in Ontario were unvaccinated patients. What we should have said was the majority of cases in intensive care were unvaccinated. We apologize for the error. Coming up, the Queen's health. What is raising more concerns about how she's doing? The Queen has cancelled her virtual engagements as she deals with COVID-19. 2 days ago, Buckingham Palace announced the 95-year-old had tested positive. She's said to be experiencing mild cold-like symptoms, though as Redmond Shannon reports, the virus is a concern for anyone her age.
A Jubilee Queen still in COVID-19 isolation, as outside Windsor Castle, her English subjects prepare to ditch the last of their pandemic laws. Despite the palace repeating that the Queen only has mild symptoms, the news that the 95-year-old monarch cancelled all her online engagements on Tuesday is a concern to some.
It's obviously such a worry for anyone to get COVID, but particularly as we know it does affect people who are older, but thankfully the Queen is triple vaccinated, so hopefully she will have a mild dose and she'll get over it very soon.
Rachel Loftus came to Windsor Castle to receive a royal honour for her services to the clinically vulnerable during the pandemic, only to arrive when the Queen herself was isolating.
It was lovely that she wanted to do some light duties, but we would encourage everyone to treat this virus, take it very seriously and look after themselves.
I do think it's significant that the palace have put out a statement within a couple of days, so at least they're keeping us informed.
Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams thinks the Queen will be eager to get back to work.
But obviously her medical team, led by Sir Hugh Thomas, are keeping a very close eye on matters.
The palace has not said when she will resume online public duties. From Thursday, people in England with COVID no longer need to isolate, but are advised to do so if they can. Redmond Shannon, Global News, Windsor, England.
Ahead, a landmark win for the U.S. women's soccer team. In the U.S., 3 men convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery, who was unarmed, have been found guilty on all charges. The jury took less than 4 hours to determine Arbery was targeted because he was black. Prosecutors revealed text messages and social media posts containing racial slurs and derogatory comments about black people. In 2020, Arbery was jogging through a Brunswick, Georgia neighborhood when the defendants chased him in trucks. They cornered him, and one of the men fatally shot him. The 3 men who are already serving life in prison now each face additional life sentences. The U.S. women's national soccer team scored a major victory off the field, settling an equal pay lawsuit with the Soccer Federation for $24 million. The legal battle has gone on for 6 years. Players allege gender discrimination in nearly every aspect of playing conditions, even while outperforming their male counterparts.
We are really in the midst of an incredible turning point in women's sport. This is just one step in furthering our sport and getting the respect and the attention that we deserve.
The settlement includes a $22 million lump sum in back pay to the players and $2 million towards players' post-career goals and other charitable efforts. The women's pay will now be on par with the men's team, including World Cup bonuses. Next, the quiet capital, the roadblocks on the return to normal in Ottawa. In Ottawa, the protesters, the honking, and the trucks are gone, but some police checkpoints are still in place. Mike Armstrong spent the day speaking to people who have waited for weeks to get back to regular life.
Nick, my important 1 or 2.
It didn't quite feel like a regular day, but Michael Hannes is very happy to be back at work. The Brasserie Metropolitaine was closed for weeks, and Hannes was stuck at home with protesters outside.
The best way I can describe it, it was like there was a lawnmower in my living room 24 hours a day,
And then we got shut down here at work, so we lost 3 weeks of pay, 4 weeks of pay. So it was terrible.
This was the scene outside the brasserie during the protest. Management did open for Valentine's Day, but says it wasn't worth it financially or emotionally.
We were still dealing with the incessant noise, the fireworks, the honking, the drinking, the people urinating and defecating on the patio.
A lot of businesses in Ottawa's Byward Market stayed open during the protest, but lost money. Public transportation was shut down, meaning people couldn't make it, and a lot of the ones who could were nervous. Eric Gary didn't close, but he lost about 80% of his customers.
People were scared to come down, so we have minimum. We basically were open not to stay at home and go crazy.
Now, life is still far from back to normal. The security zone around Parliament Hill is smaller, but it's still a chunk of downtown that's surrounded by an 8-foot fence and police checkpoints.
It's just been insane.
These men live in the security zone and ventured out for the first time Tuesday, still a little in shock.
It was really brutal. There was no police, there was no... Neighbors were caring for each other, but we were forgotten.
As if this area hadn't been through enough, there was a police operation on this day. The mall that's been closed for 3 weeks was closed again for a suspected armed shoplifter. People who had been out of work were out on the streets. A lot of people in this city were shaking their heads, wondering what's next. The return to normalcy isn't a straight line. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Ottawa.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday, February 22nd, a once-in-a-lifetime date. It is 22-22, a palindrome day because it reads the same forwards as backwards. It's also an ambergram because on a calculator it can be read upside down in exactly the same way. So it's both a Tuesday and a Tuesday. To some, the lineup of twos is just mind-blowing. People are matching it with temperatures, with birthdays, with speedometers. And with time, the ultimate is when the clock hits 22:22 tonight. For some businesses, it is a marketing dream, toonie deals and a chance for a double-double giveaway. And it's an extra special day for weddings. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.